At the beginning of the 20th century, the science fiction author Herbert George Wells made the following prediction. If we want an educated citizenship in a modern technological democracy, we need to teach them three things: reading, writing, and statistical thinking. Almost 100 years later, we have managed in the Western world to teach almost everyone, more or less, reading and writing, but not statistical thinking. A TV speaker on an American program once announced the weather the following way. He said, the probability that it will rain on Saturday is 50%. The probability it will rain on Sunday is also 50%. Therefore, he concluded, the probability it will rain on the weekend is 100%. That, we laugh at that, but as we will see in a minute, there is a great deficit in teaching statistical thinking to almost everyone. We teach children the mathematics of certainty, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, beautiful things, but not relevant for everyone late in his life. We should start to teach statistical thinking, not probability theory, but statistical thinking attached to empirical problems, where young people learn to judge whether that is a good tool for this and this situation. Also, law schools so far do not teach statistical thinking. And statistical thinking is particular, also important for the decision whether statistics should be used at all. And then, of course, if it's used in order to be protected as a judge, as a lawyer, against the twisting of statistical information. I direct the Harding Center for Risk Literacy in Berlin. It is part of the Max-Planck-Institut for Human Development. And we have been trying for many years to help people in various domains to get statistical literate. It is a great pleasure that in this month, David Harding, after whom this institute is named the head of Winton Capital, gave the University of Cambridge a present, another institute called the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication. And I just urge you to connect this institute or wherever you are working and network to create a more powerful structure so that we get out of the pre-enlightenment into a situation where people are used to think with evidence and you're used to discuss that. What I will do today is I will talk about the psychology of evidence. So we'll talk about three topics that relate how people understand risk to the more specific topic of this workshop. The first is the question, why do we fear what most likely will not kill us? So here the psychological factors are intertwined with the evidence, and we often don't see the evidence because we have, in this case, certain fears. The second question will be how to present information at a court, and the point is that every statistical information can be presented in at least two different ways. One is transparent, and one misleads many without them noticing. And I will also give you a recipe for situations where you want to use a Bayes rule in court, how to make almost everyone understand the Bayes rule. And so the second part is about the art of risk communication, and the third one is about defensive decision making. Why many decisions in our society by experts are not made to fit the evidence best, but for self-defense. So that's the program. Are you ready? Then let's start. I will basically just give one or two examples each, and then we are through. Almost every one of you will remember where you were on 9/11/2001. I will now deal you with what happened after 9/11. We know that many people stopped flying. What did they do? Did they stay home or jump in their car? That's US. There's no real public transport system anymore. And I have analyzed the traffic statistics and found that for 12 months after 9/11, the miles driven increased up to 5%, and mostly on interstate highways where you have to travel long distance. Then everything went back to normal. That was the time where this picture were no longer shown almost every day. During that time, an estimated 1,600 Americans died on the roads in the attempt to avoid the risk of flying. Is there a pointer? Yes. What you see here is the number of fatal crashes above below the monthly average. The monthly average at this time was about 3,500. It is here normalized because there are some months where more people die on the road than others systematically. Do you want to guess which month is the most safest one, where the least people die on the roads in the US?
February.
Yes, smart. Only 28 days, that's it. And so the variability was 3,500, a little bit above and below, yeah. And then September 11, and for this 12 months, the number of people killed on the road was always above the average, and most of the time outside the entire variability of the last 5 years. That's these bars. And then everything went back to normal. Terrorists strike twice. First with physical force, the second with the help of our brains, our anxiety. What is the anxiety that terrorists exploit? It is known as, I call it at least, dread risk. Dread risk refers to a situation where many people die within a short time, like in a plane accident. It is easy to elicit our anxieties in this situation where people die socially, many together. It's very hard to elicit anxieties of situations where as many people or more die distributed over the year. Think about car driving, smoking, or other things. It's almost impossible. So we react to a situation that likely, that cannot be proved, was an adaptive one in the history of humans, where we were living in small groups, where the sudden death of a larger part of the group could threaten the survival of the rest. That's no longer relevant today, but it's still easy to elicit this anxiety. So here we have a situation which is not just limited to 9/11. Think about the imagined catastrophes like mad cow disease, or SARS, or bird flu or swine flu, and so on. It's always the same thing. We hear the news and we think, and in part the World Health Organization gives a large number of people who might die, and then half a year later the media stops reporting and we forgot everything and worry about the next thing. That's the same mechanism that's at work here. Now, what are the best estimates of the real statistics? So how dangerous is flying compared to driving? And by the way, these estimated 1,600 Americans are more than those who died in all of the 4 planes. And about half of those who totally died on the ground and in the planes. So the second strike can be as dangerous as the first one, but there's almost no attention. And the second strike did not only include the life of the people, but also legal actions, like in the US Homeland Security, a huge bureaucracy, and also legal restrictions of personal freedom and allowance and introduction of mass surveillance. That's also part of the second strike that makes us, that has the potential to just get democracy slowly down. So back to the statistical question. Assume you want to fly from London to Edinburgh. You want to travel there. And your choice is to fly or to drive. And assume you have only one goal, arrive alive. Would you fly or would you drive? Drive. Because you feel safer behind the wheel. Yeah. So put it into a quantitative question. So how many miles or kilometers would you have to drive so that your risk of dying will become the same as in a non-stop flight? Again, so how long can you drive until the risk is getting the same as a non-stop flight? What do you think?
10 yards.
10
yards.
10 yards.
Yeah.
You have not a big confidence in your ability of driving. Anyone else?
Much more, 10 times as much as the flight.
So that's 1,000, 10,000 kilometers. If I ask this question,
10 times less than the flight. Not. The flight should be 10 times longer than the car, maybe?
okay, give me a number.
How far is it from London to Edinburgh?
Forget London, Edinburgh. Just how much here? So I have gotten estimates like 10,000 kilometers until the danger is as big, 100,000, 3 times around it.
But until the danger is as big as what?
As a non-stop flight.
But from where to how? I see.
Non-stop flights,
it
doesn't so much because most of things happening on the takeoff and thing. Huh? And anyhow, these numbers are all crude, and the actual numbers are American numbers. Still. So the best answer is, it is 20 kilometers or 12 miles. So if you arrive safely with your car on the airport, the most dangerous part of the trip is probably already behind you. I know companies who avoid that their top executives take the same plane, but they travel with the same car to the airport. So,
but isn't there an issue that people think that in a car, if there's an accident, they won't die, or they may not die, but in a plane, they're sure to die?
yeah, there may be all kind of reasons, see? But again, my hypothesis is the reason is dread risk, because you die socially at once. And it's often said that the reason why people trust in, they're happy to sit in a car as opposed to in a plane is because they have no control in the plane. But just think a moment. If you are sitting next to the drivers, you have no control either. Or if you're sitting in the back, nothing at all, but you still are happily there. So
Other
it's not control. It's not as easy, and it's probably another issue about trade risk. Or another example, think about mad cow disease. Remember how we all were anxious about biting into a steak because we are fearing to get the human version of mad cow disease. How many people died within 10 years in all of Europe from the consequences of mad cow disease, that is the Creutzfeldt-Jakob variant? How many?
200?
Yeah, about 150 roughly. And all this fuss. How many people died in all of Europe? Also, within 10 years, from something that cost as much, 150. Drinking of, what is this in English? The colored lamp oil. So there are parents who like this kind of light, and it looks like lemonade and it smells like lemonade, and little children try to drink this colored lamp oil and die. I work with the German institution that is for risk assessment, and they have for years in vain tried to get kind of a label there. And all the attention was to mad cow disease. The children didn't count. Now, if the same 150 children would have died on one day, it would be the biggest fuss ever. Then we have a trade risk again. So this is an example about one psychological mechanism, trade risk, the anxiety of situations where many people die in one short time, and how it affects our own risk perception, our own anxieties, and how it prevents many people from statistical thinking. There is literature you may know that uses all kind, not really this kind of examples, but textbook problems, and concludes that all of you, more or less, are statistically illiterate, and most important, there's no hope for you. And in our work, we have shown that everyone who wants to learn can learn how to deal with risk. And you don't need a degree in statistics, just need a few principles, and also not just statistical principles, but also psychological principles to understand why you don't want to see this evidence, for instance. So I come to the part of risk communication, and I will only deal with two things. The first one is single event statements and frequencies. So to illustrate it, assume you hear on the radio or read on the internet that tomorrow is a 30% chance of rain. What does that mean? I've done a study and have in my research group postdocs from all over the world and sent them back in their home cities to ask people on the street, pedestrians, what does that mean? So 30% of what? I live in Berlin. Most Berliners say, oh, it means it will rain tomorrow in 30% of the time. That is 7 to 8 hours. Others think it will rain tomorrow in 30% of the area. So most likely not where I live. The New Yorkers, most of the New Yorkers we have asked, think that the Berliners have no idea what's going on. It means something different, something third, namely, it will rain on 30% of the days for which the prediction has been made, a minimum. So most likely it will not rain at all tomorrow. So are people stupid? So does this fit in the behavioral economics and social psychology method? No. The problem here is in part the lack of training of experts in communicating the risk. In that case, the experts often fail to mention the reference class. So is it now about time, or is it about region, or about days, or something else? For instance, a woman in Athens had a very different and highly imaginative reference class. She said, I know what a 30% chance of rain means. 3 meteorologists think it rains and 7 not. That's as likely as everything. But the point is, there are certain principles of risk communication, and one very basic principle is specify your reference class if you talk about a probability. And the point is that single event probabilities, it will rain tomorrow, that's the event. There's a 30% chance. Do not specify that. While a frequency statement always does it. So it 3 out of 10 meteorologists. So that's a frequency statement, and it states the reference class. So the same problem arises in the court. And here are 2 ways to communicate or frame a random match probability. So that could be DNA evidence. And so one way is that, so assume there is assume you are accused having committed a murder. We have no evidence against you except one, which is crucial. Your DNA matches on the victim. Now you stand trial. I'm the judge. And I, as most judges, had never had any training in statistical reasoning, so I'll ask an expert witness. And now it all depends how the expert witness frames the evidence. He or she could do it in a single event probability. So that's this match. Or in a frequency statement. So the single event probability might be the probability that this match occurred by chance is 1 in 100,000. And then it doesn't look good for you. You see that? I have trained American federal judges and teach them to recognize the single event probability statements and don't allow that. Ask for a frequency statement. Send the expert witness back and say, tell me this in frequencies, please. And then he might say, out of every 100,000 people, 1 will show a match. Although it's the same thing. It gives you, invites you in different thinking. In Berlin, we have 3.5 million. You have many more here in London. And so you expect quite a number to match. And so the framing of the information helps people to understand, or it prevents them to understand. And it's very important that one recognizes that. So that topic entered to my knowledge first the O.J. Simpson case, where Jonathan Curler, with whom I worked, over an intermediary, got the idea, and Judge Ito ruled that the statement should be done in frequencies. And the expert witness didn't follow that, nevertheless, because he was a mathematician and thought it's all the same, who cares? It's only psychology. But psychology is important to help people to understand. The same difference between single event probabilities and frequency statements is relevant not only when you present information, but also when you ask a question. Here's an example. This is from a study where actual cases, discharge summaries from patients who had a history of violence were given to members of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the members of the American Psychology Law Society, more than 400 each. And they read an entire real case. And then the question is, should one discharge the person? You don't know whether he or she will get violent again, but so what's the chance? And then you can ask the same question as a single event probability. What is the probability that this man will commit a violent act in the next 6 months? Or as a frequency? How many out of 100 men or 10 men or whatever like this patient would commit a violent act in the next 6 months? And what I would convey to you is that the two questions will not necessarily lead to the same answers because they're not equivalent. They look equivalent. The last one specifies the frequency, a reference class. The first one does not. And if you cannot think about other reference class, just think better about meteorologists and think there are lots of others. For instance, yeah.
There is a point there about reference class with respect to the single event probability. The reference class is the set of future possibilities for this man, where there is, as it were, a distribution for a pathway through those possibilities.
I'm not sure whether I understand it. So
it's like predicting the weather.
Yeah, so the first one, I say, is ambiguous.
It's ambiguous.
It's
Not the
ambiguous.
meaning it could have.
That maybe you mean that. And for instance, it could mean, look, the question, the expert can interpret that in this way. So if it's about weekend release, for instance, if I let out this person 10 times, how often will he commit a crime? Which is not the same as if I let out 10 people once, yeah, and how many will. Yeah? It's both, the first one is consistent with that, and with many other reference classes you can think about. The second one makes it precise. I'll show you now what experts who do this judgment, how their own judgment is affected by the way the question is being asked. And it's in both expert groups the same thing. If you ask the probability question, then the predicted degree of violence is substantially higher than if you ask the frequency question. So that's an illustration. And the lesson is, be careful how you convey information about match probabilities, any kind of probabilities, and you always, also with likelihood ratios, you always can choose a single event frame or a frequency frame. I would prefer the frequency frame because it decreases ambiguity. Let's apply the same idea to Bayesian reasoning. Here we have one typical representation, which I call here conditional probabilities, and if you have that corresponds to likelihood ratios, and another one which is called natural frequencies. I'll demonstrate the difference using a problem you are maybe not so familiar with from cancer diagnosis. I will first give you the information in conditional probabilities. So the situation is a woman, age 50, takes mammography screening for breast cancer, and she tests positive. She asks the doctor, what does that mean? Do I have breast cancer, or what's the probability? That's the situation. I give you now the information that the doctor would need in conditional probabilities, as it's usually in textbooks. I hope I will confuse you with that your mind is blurred. This is a highly selected audience, but maybe I will succeed with one or the other. And then I give you the same information in natural frequencies, and I hope you will see straight through. Ready? Okay. What you need to know to answer the woman's question, which is, what's the probability that I have cancer, breast cancer, given this positive test, is the following, and we make the numbers simple. The prevalence of undetected breast cancer in this population of people being screened is 1%. Second, if a woman has breast cancer, the probability that she will test positive is 90%. Third, if a woman does not have breast cancer, the probability that she nevertheless tests positive is 9%. So you have a prevalence of 1%, a specificity of 90%, a sensitivity of 90% or hit rate, and a false alarm rate of 9%. What do you tell this woman? You know nothing else about her, it's screening. What is the chance, the best estimate, that she actually has breast cancer?
1 in 9.
1 in 9?
1 in 10.
1 in 10? This is a highly sophisticated group here. I'll show you. So if your mind is clouded, that's what I want to see. Joseph's mind is never clouded. It doesn't work, is it? But I'll show you. So I've been training doctors. And I'll show you a continuing medical education session with 160 gynecologists who should know about that. And they have 4 answers they can choose from. And I made them so far apart, it's not about fine-tuning. One answer is that this person has a 90% chance that she has cancer. The other, 81. The next one, 10%, and the final one, 1%. What do you think? I'll show you now 160 doctors, everyone a point. Do you think they know where there is? So here's the distribution. Every point a doctor, and 47% of them say, oh, best estimate, she has a 90% chance of breast cancer. 30% 81, 10%, 21% say, oh, it's, 10 out of 100, or just 1%. And it's, there is most of them think that it's between 80 and 90, but you can see it's all over the place. And again, these are experienced gynecologists, usually age 40s and 50s. Yeah? So that's the situation, very typical in medicine, and just shows you that there's also no effective training in statistical thinking in medical school. It's not a problem of the law schools alone. Yeah? The law schools don't even start usually to teach. Medical schools teach biostatistics, enters here, exits immediately there. And in both groups, many students choose law or medicine to avoid one thing, which is statistical thinking. So, again as before, here's a simple remedy for this problem, which is natural frequencies. And natural frequencies is a representation where you start not with one woman, but with a larger number. And make it simple, let's start with 100. And we translate the information that you just got into that, okay? Think about 100 women. We expect that one of them has cancer, and most likely tests positive, the 90%. Among the 99 who do not have cancer, we expect another 9 to have a positive test. That's the false alarms. So we have 10 who get a positive test. How many of them do actually have cancer? You see it's 1 out of 10. So that's called natural frequencies. You can do it more fine-grained, start with 1,000, but it makes no difference. When I teach the doctors natural frequencies on different problems, and at the end of a 90-minute session gives them the same problem, the mammography problem again, in conditional probabilities, and ask them if they now can understand what the answer is, that's the result. And you can see that 87% of these 160 now understand. There are a few hopeless cases, but that's all what you can do in 60. So here's another representation, and we know also why this works. And the interesting thing is that the that's the conditional probability representation, and that's so-called Bayes rules that you need. So if you had fog in your mind, that's right. And the interesting thing is that natural frequencies facilitate the computations. So they're different from relative frequencies. Relative frequencies is just like here. And the same thing can now be used in court, and that's a typical situation of the inferences from a DNA, a reported DNA, to guilt. And I just now deal just with the first part. There's a reported match. You want to know what's the chance that's a true match or a false alarm. And we have done a number of studies with real cases, and I'll not going into detail. Here is the conditional probability version, and here natural frequencies. So there are 10 million who could be the perpetrator. Estimates are 10 out of these have a profile that's identical with the trace, but there are also 100 that's a so-called false alarms, and one can much easier see that 10 out of 100 plus 10 is the best answer. And when we test judges and professors of law, and we give them and these are largely real cases of many pages, and the only thing that we change is we change the probabilities in these cases into natural frequencies. Then we find with the original probabilities, very few of the professionals can have a realistic estimate of the probability that the reported match is a true match. And the moment it's changed in natural frequencies, then that goes up to around 70% without any training. And the same holds for law students. Everything is scaled down. And interestingly, also it influences the guilty verdicts. And so for professionals, if they are confused with probabilities and often not noticing, there are more who come up with a guilty verdict than when there's transparent information, and the same for law students. So I guess in case of time, let me finish and skip to defensive decision making. I talked today that many people and experts of various kinds included do not have sufficient training to understand statistical information. And as a consequence, if they are doctors, they can be manipulated by the pharmaceutical industry and their glossy leaflets in any direction you want. And we know of a number of cases where something similar happened in the court. The causes are failure of professional schools to teach statistical thinking. That holds for legal schools, that holds for medical schools as well. And also, as a consequence, biased risk communication can flourish. Because if you have sufficiently innumerate people who don't notice it or don't even think it's not relevant, it's enough to be able to read and write, but who cares about numbers? Then you can influence the people. There would be a few simple solutions. Start teaching statistical thinking, or more generally risk literacy, in law schools. I once taught a course at the University of Virginia Law School in Charlottesville. It was the first course there and the last one. And not because students didn't like it. Students came skeptical, because these were very eloquent students who, if you showed them an equation, they were running away. But once they learned that actually by using the one frame they can deceive their opponent, say the prosecution, and by the other one here they can win an argument over that, they were bought in. So there are, depending on the country of course, there are lots of ways you can motivate them and in order to change that. And also, courts should require transparent communication of evidence, such as frequencies and natural frequencies. Thank you for your attention.
Invite you to ask your questions to Professor Gigerenzer during the coffee break. And we'll reconvene at 11:30.